Hey everybody, it's Morphing Jars here, back with another deck profile for a somewhat odd archetype many of you probably haven't seen before. So this is going to be Mutants. This was a TCG exclusive archetype released in Phantom Rage, so about 2 years ago, maybe a little less than 2 years ago, but a while now. And since then, they've only gotten one new piece of support. So hopefully sometime in the future they get something new. If it's like Mathmex, it'll be amazing, right? If it's like Bee Troopers or any of those other archetypes, they won't be so good. Though Mathmex aren't a TCG exclusive, but I digress. This archetype and this deck offers kind of a sort of gameplay style that Scareclaw or Shadow's or some of the other decks I've covered before, maybe not Machina, that's kind of similar. A gameplay type that you don't really get typically. And this is kind of like it's like a pseudo control combo deck in that it has some pretty interesting lines where the order of activating your effects really matters and it's really impactful. And then sometimes you're just really concerned with your card advantage and grinding. So this archetype, as I mentioned before, it's a fusion-based archetype, but it has a couple larger main boss monsters. And so the main mechanic is that there is these sort of like mutant like ampules, I guess, filled with these little like viruses. There's ST46 and MO5, and then this one over here, GB88, were the first three that were released. And then since then, in Battle of Chaos, we got Mutant released, which is a great piece of legacy support. I won't complain too much, but it's obviously been purposefully limited. I think really for no reason. Because this deck, it wouldn't even be amazing just because of the way that the gameplay is. It kind of would still just be a worse version of decks that already exist. And a little bit. I don't want to sell this deck short. This deck does some really cool stuff that I'll get to a little bit later on in the video. But this card is the fourth, I guess, little mutant virus that we have. And so I guess maybe it's MO5. I don't know. In any case, so there's these ones, and these all have effects on normal or special. ST46 adds a spell trap, that's what the ST's for, and M adds a monster, very convenient for when you're learning the deck. And then Mutant is kind of just like this extender that you can search off of MO5, and it like special summons itself, and it's kind of useful for just utility purposes. And technically it can do the other mechanic of the little viruses, which is they can tribute themselves and then banish a card from your hand or field, face-up field, of one of the three super types, so a spell, trap, or monster. And then it will summon an appropriate monster from deck. So with MO5 and ST46, they have to be from hand or field. With Mutant, you can also do from your deck. So if you do a monster, you summon Beast. If you do a spell, you summon Arsenal. And if you do a trap, you summon Mist. And they go in, unfortunately, probably that order of usefulness. Beast is the most useful, that's why we play two. Arsenal it's very big and it's got a pretty useful effect. Or it's the second best effect. And then especially the add back effect, I think, is the one that adds back, a spell, which is sometimes useful. Anyways, and then this one, they don't negate. So unfortunately, like Beast negates and banishes a spell, which is nice, and especially in this format where it's very spell focused. Like you've got Starter, you've got Perolino, you've got just a bunch of really impactful spells. I mean, you've got the pots, just for example. E-Telly is really important, right? So Beast is actually really useful. Even just as an engine piece, even if it wasn't just like a kind of a sort of engine requirement, quote unquote. Arsenal is not quite so useful. It doesn't, so in response to a monster effect, it can banish a card on the hand or field, which can include itself, for example. So this effect is always live. You can target a monster on the field and then banish it, which is useful. I mean, banishing is a very useful form of removal in this format. Targeting, not so great, but it's kind of just, like I said, an engine requirement. And then Mist is the least useful, so when your opponent activates a trap card, you can banish a card, hand or field, to draw two cards. Which, it's nice, because if your opponent is going to, like for example, evenly match you, you can just banish Mist and banish itself in response, or you can banish another card, and then you get to draw two cards, so you go like +2 off of the interaction. If you banish, you're going like +1 off the interaction, and then you're potentially letting evenly match be not as tough of a decision, because then you can just banish the Mist because you've already used its effect or something like that. Anyways, it doesn't really come up all that often. It's just, again, an engine requirement. You need to at least play 3 of these, but you don't want to see them in your hand usually. Luckily, you can just use them for the effects of the little mutants. Just banish them if you have them in hand. You don't need them in hand. It doesn't do anything in hand. And luckily, the little mutants can summon from hand or deck, so it's not a hard brick. You just would prefer not to draw them. So that's why you're minimizing it down to playing 4. I messed up lefties here. But yeah, so that's basically the thing in the deck. Because it's fusion-based, and in order to be a competitive or a semi-competitive fusion archetype in this meta, you need to fuse from deck. But also, it's nice when you have something like a Thunder Dragon fusion, and so this deck has both of those things. It has kind of like a more conditional Shaddoll fusion. Well, more and less conditional. It's alive against more decks. Mutant fusion is alive against more decks, but it's alive less often, I guess is a good way to put it. So it lets you you can fusion summon a mutant monster by banishing fusion materials from your hand or field, and then if your opponent has activated any cards or effects this turn at all, so better than triple attack, and that triple attack only affects your main phase, but this is whenever you want. And then as long as they activate a card or effect during your turn, so like you can do this in main phase 2, for example, if an effect triggers on destruction or something like that. You can use up to 1 monster each from your deck and graveyard as well. So it's not truly a Shaddoll fusion, but in some ways it's better, because if you have mutants stuck in the graveyard, it's really hard to get them back. But if they're in the banish zone, you can access them pretty much whenever you want. You can recur with them a lot. So I think the Mutant Fusion is a very good card going second, obviously, and it's nichely useful going first, because like if your opponent hand traps you, though monster hand traps are less and less popular in this format, but it is useful because you can use like if your opponent halfnesses you and then summons like a Shaddoll fusion, well, you can usually use, because of the requirements of Ultimus, especially if like they have to activate halfness into response to an effect being activated on field. So if you like normal ST whatever, and then they chain halfness, they mill 3, and then you see there's a Shaddoll in there, and they're going to try and turn 0 window you, well then you can just add Mutant Fusion, and then from there you can use one of the Loveliest from deck and then the ST46 on field, and then you can go into a Synthesis, which can out it in battle, so it's not really a great out, especially because window can't be short by card effects, but the Synthesis is really sticky, so at least it's some sort of in-engine out, so it's worth playing 1, and then if you have to go second, it's obviously very good in that situation. Evolution Lab's kind of a really lackluster field spell. I feel like this could just say, when this card is activated, or like as an ignition effect, you can special summon one of your level 4 or lower mutants from hand or banish, because you almost never have them in your hand unless you purposefully go out of your way to put them there, and I feel like the field spell should reward you for that sort of like forward thinking, but it doesn't. It's only when you activate it. So it's good for like turn 1 combos, or like if you draw it mid combo, you can get some resources back from the banish zone, and so in that way it might be worth playing more than 1 just for the grind game, but I find that it's almost always just searched. I almost never open it. In other versions of the deck, you maybe could like terraforming into it, but in this pure version of the deck, which I settled on, I think it's useful, especially because you can put a card back on the deck, a monster from your hand on the bottom of the deck, a mutant monster, and then draw a card, which is obviously mutually exclusive with Prosperity. It's not a great card, but it's a field spell, so it's worth playing. 2 copies of Cry. If you find yourself needing more, like if your meta is very control focused, for example, and you don't like die turn 3, like so if you're in a situation where you're getting to turns like 6 or 7 very consistently, then you could play 3 Mutant Cry, just because it's probably like the most powerful card in the archetype at this point. Just like a quick effect, Thunder Dragon Fusion, meaning that it shuffles mutants from, it can only summon mutants, and it shuffles from the deck, or it shuffles from the graveyard, the face-up field, and the face-up banish pile. So, or I guess not even face-up field, just anything on your field. So if you get Book of Moon, it's fine. But your face-up banish pile. So that's how you're but you have to be very thoughtful with how you're doing it, because very often, well, you'll see, and I guess I could have explained here. So Mutant Beast, see, when this card is destroyed by an opponent's card, so battler card effect, you can add a banished mutant trap. This one adds a monster, and then this one adds a spell. And so it's worth leaving some mutants like marooned in your banish pile, some mutant cards, which happens very naturally because all of your effects banish for cost. But it's worth thinking about that, just because if your card was to be outed, you'd want to have the recurability. So yeah, kind of I guess how in Flunneries you have to think about the way your chains are being, which birds you're leaving in the banish pile to chain block and things like that. But sorry, I'm going a little slow. Mutant Expansion, kind of unfortunate that we have to play this card, but just if you don't draw any of the babies or any of the viruses, you're not going to be doing anything. I love the card art, so I guess I'm kind of glad that we do get to play it, but when this card is activated, you can take a level 4 or lower mutant monster, spec it, or add it to hand. So if you're under draw, you just spec it. Or, I'm sorry, if you're locked for TCBO and you can't spec it, you can just add it to hand, which is really nice. So the card isn't useless under TCBO, and actually it enables us to play. There can be only one, but The other effect is that if a level 8 or higher mutant, which all of the, these ones are all level 8, all the fusion monsters are level 8 or higher, you can, if it destroyed by card effect, you can banish it. The other thing is, because it's a face-up trap card, it's basically just like, I guess, bullets for your level 8s. Because if you, like, for example, if you want to negate a spell, but for whatever reason you want to leave Beast on the field instead, then you can just banish this instead. And then not only is it loaded to be added back by Beast if it went to the graveyard, or Synthesis if you want to, but it just means that you don't really lose card advantage, because the expansion's already giving you a monster on field, plus then if that monster activates its effect, you add another card in hand, and then also this card can be used to protect your level 8s, which comes up pretty often. People don't really read the card, or it can be used as cost for one of your level 8 effects. So this is kind of just like a really good card advantage preservation engine. Then the real reason to play this deck again, Emergency Teleport at 3. All of these are psychics, so this card is amazing. I mean, it's annoying when you have 2 of these in hand, and it's annoying that you have to play 6 of them, because like if you open too many of them, they're not going to do anything, but it's worth it just because you need them for the grind game, and Emergency Teleport like takes a lot of that off. So effectively you have like 4 Emergency Teleports, because you've got 3 plus this one. So if you open like Mutant MO5 and then Evolution Lab, you can do Evolution Lab to spec the MO5 effect to add ST46 to add like your Cry or something, and then you can, yeah, you'll see in the replays, but the E-Tele is just amazing. Proud of Prosperity just to either search for TCBO, Super Poly, E-Tele, whatever you need. It's just a great card in this deck, just because you've got so much room in your extra deck. Like, I usually do 3 just because you almost never need anything. Like, you almost always open enough points of interaction, but you could do 6 if you were really in a dire strait. Like if you open like 3D shifters and the Impairment of pot, you could do 6 comfortably, and even you could do 3 twice, which is nice. But it is worth, like, while I am playing quite a bit of mutants in the extra deck, you do need to think about how you're going, like the trajectory of the game is going to be when you're banishing them. One called by, just because like an Ash on an ST46 really hurts, because then your engine just dies right there. Because if you resolve Mutant Cry, then like the engine continues, and you have like kind of a TG-esque like conga line of dudes just keep going on and on. They all keep adding themselves back, and you keep getting card advantage, which is good because it's a control deck, and control decks lose card advantage just inherently compared to a combo deck. And so it's like the Call by the Grave is very important. I don't always like having Call by the Grave in every deck, and I feel like going forward I'm going to consider playing it in less decks, but it's very necessary in this deck. Speaking of which, Super Poly, kind of a necessary evil. I don't love this card, and I'm trying to see if I could take this out and maybe put something else in. But it does help you like get rid of, like, go for game on turn 3, or help stymie your opponent's plays. It's really good into the tier matchup, which is kind of a weird matchup for this deck, but you will see a gameplay. It's good into especially because of the type or the attributes, because all of the viruses are water and the synthesis are water. You can actually just snipe an opponent's Toad or things like that, and it helps you go really, like, so if your opponent activates an effect, you can Mutant Fusion and then Super Poly, like you get a pop, and then you go into like a Garura or something, or sorry, you go into a Mud Dragon to protect the rest of your waters for the turn or something like that. It's actually pretty useful in this current meta, even though some decks are taking care to not be able to be Super Poly, I guess. But you can, basically what I'm saying is, like, you can set up a lot of situations that are like Super Poly positive. I don't know. Imperm, just because it's probably the best hand trap right now. It doesn't play into triple attack, which is good, because if they rip your starter out of your hand with triple attack, you lose. Dimensional Shifter, this deck loves Dimensional Shifter. So the only thing is, like, there is a card advantage combo that Dimension Shifter kind of messes up. You might be able to see it if you look forward into the extra deck. And the card advantage combo is really good, and it helps you, like I said, just make up a lot of the card advantage differential between a combo deck and a control deck. But the problem is Dimension Shifter is so amazing in this format, right? Like, if you can play Dimension Shifter, you do play it, and this deck actually loves Dimension Shifter. Because of that problem I mentioned earlier with mutants getting stuck in the graveyard. And then finally, there can be only one. This deck plays around it very well, because all the level 8s are all different types. So you can usually set up a situation where you are like favored, for example, because you have like just a really big boss monster that can't be outed, like Arsenal, and it's getting some attack off of the Evolution Lab, and then you can shuffle back some things to make an Ultimus, and then how are they outing this Ultimus, right? Like it's very good, but you do get some kind of weird situations where, like, you'll be TCBO locked, and you'll have resolved an expansion to have MO5, and then it's like, how do I clear that MO5? We do have some tools in the extra deck to like help get that thing off the field, which is good. And then also, without fail, your opponent runs into this, even though it's locking you too. I don't know why they do that. So then we'll get to the extra now. I'm sorry I'm taking a long time. I really like this archetype, and I'm glad to finally be able to, you know, talk about it in, I guess, more of a public situation. So Ultimus here, this is like your big boss monster, but it comes up very infrequently, and many times you win games without it at all. So, I mean, if you wanted to tell me that you would only play one of it, you know, and play something else, I could probably believe you. Maybe just like another super poly target, but also it's nice to be able to have like an easy target off Prosperity, and it does come up once in a blue moon in a really grindy game. It's hard to make though. It takes 3 level 8 or higher mutant monsters, so generally it's like if you can banish all 3 of these turn 1, you can set up a Mutant Cry, which Mutant helps you with because it banishes from deck, right? So you can, if you open one of these, and then if you open one, and then you can get into, like, so if you open Mist, you can use one of the baby effects, discarding Mist, or tributing itself, banishing Mist to summon Beast. Then you can use Mutant's effect, banishing the other one from deck, and then your Cry will then allow you to shuffle back the one on field, which usually you want to use its effect first, so it gets put in the banish pile. You can shuffle back all 3 from the banish, and then go into an Ultimus. Ultimus is just an Omni Negate, and it's an Omni Negate and banish. You just have to banish a mutant card from your hand, graveyard, or face up field, which a lot of times is great, because especially if it's in the graveyard, you're just setting this card's recursion effect back up, because if this fusion summon card is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can add up to 3 of your banished mutant cards, up to 1 of each. So generally you want to get like 1 spell in there, 1 trap in there, 1 monster in there, right? And the banishing effect for the negate helps a lot with that. You don't go into this all that often. If you just want to buy one of them because it's a super rare, I could totally understand that. And this deck is relatively budget. I know this has a lot here, but also like you could just not play this, and you could play X-Drive. You could change your X deck to play X-Drive instead. Just play like more of these. D-Shifter I think is kind of expensive, so you don't have to play that. Obviously Ash and Imperm are kind of expensive. You could play just other traps, like better traps instead. Maybe more Floodgates. You could play Skill Drain in the main. I don't know if I'd love playing Skill Drain in the main, but because it's not great, like Eldritch is going to play Skill Drain a lot better than you, so if you get into that matchup, it's going to be really bad, but you'll play Skill Drain better than most decks. But in any way, so you could definitely make this deck fairly budget, and so, yeah. Anyways, Synthesis takes 2 mutant monsters with different attributes. I think what would be great for this deck, along those lines, is if we get another mutant that has some really good effect, like Mutant, but just different, and it's not another virus, and it's not a water. Because the problem is, to summon Synthesis, you usually, and you can't even, if you play like a Dogmatica version and you try and send the Synthesis, it doesn't even work, because the Synthesis is water. You'd have to send an Ultimus, which wouldn't be that bad, like if you want to set up a Mutant Cry. And maybe there is some flex to that. I didn't really explore that, actually. It would make it easier to summon Ultimus, because you could just shuffle back the Ultimus. Because it is higher than level 8, yeah. So this requires 2 mutant monsters with different attributes. Usually it's one of your level 8s and then one of your waters, or this and one of your level 8s. But in any case, its effect is if it's fusion summoned, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. Unfortunately, it's targeting. This card would be a lot better if it didn't target, but it's not too bad nowadays because there's not that much targeting protection outside of like Avermax or the Elf, but. You don't really, you can make this into the Elf, but it's kind of yeah. Anyways, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can chain this card to that to then make it unaffected by that type you're chaining to, which is, you'll see it comes up quite a bit, and it makes this card really hard to remove. And then if this fusion summon card is destroyed by an opponent's card, like with Ultimus, you can just add one of your banished mutants back. So you do want to think about what you're leaving in the banish zone with Mutant Cry, just to be able to think about what you can add back off Synthesis, because ultimately the Mutant Synthesis is only 2,500. They will remove it at some point. It's mostly just like a quick effect disruption, but when they do, you want to get value off of it. Then for super poly targets, we have Dracostapelia, we have Garura, and then we have Trifoverdum. This could easily be Starving Venom. I kind of just like the effect that Trifoverdum does on field, and I feel like every situation which Starving Venom could cover, I feel like the combination of Trifoverdum and Dragostapelia covers it better. And there's actually some times when the opponent plays in, like Sprite players will play into Trifoverdum. Tier players, of course, play into Trifoverdum, and so I think this card is worth trying. But put this Starving Venom here if you would prefer that. And then Muddragon. Muddragon is just a good one this turn, especially because then like that allows you to super poly. This is the target for Toad and one of your mutants, or Synthesis is Muddragon. Anyways, we got Dingirsu. this is because the deck is like all targeted removal. We have level 8s, we might as well, right? And then it just like helps you remove things like Avermax, right? Otherwise you have no way to out it. Yeah, so then we have like Access Code, Nightmare Unicorn, of course. We'll talk about this at the end. Cross Sheep, just because you're fusioning constantly. Cross Sheep can help you get value. There's some pretty crazy plays you can do. It's really good for link climbing. I mean, this is definitely the best link 2 for this archetype in general. And then Anima, this is because you have Mutant and it's searchable and it special summons itself. It's just kind of like if your opponent is silly enough to leave their monster in a zone where Anima works, and it's very good. And then you could just then link it off, because usually you're adding Mutant off of MO5, so then you can just link it off into the next card with the Mutant MO5, which is Sprite Off. Sprite Off is just really good because it gives you targeting protection for your cards, which is vital, because if your opponent is thinking about, right-gekking your board when you have like a full board of Mutants, and you have a beast up, then they would have to imperm the elf and then the beast to be able to stop you, like to be able to imperm the thing. So really the targeting protection is like a big part of this, especially because it's going to be really hard for your opponent to attack over this because of the like pops and disruptions you're putting up during your turn, and with TCBO. But also the effect to special summon a level 2 back, usually you're bringing back MO5. So MO5 is the only level 2 in this deck. So actually, I say usually, it's the only target. So the combo, the first turn combo, I do it several times in some of the videos, but it's like, if you open with MO5, you normal MO5 effect to add Mutant special summons itself, and then you just link those two into Sprite Elf. You bring back the Mutant, or the MO5. MO5 sends itself and then banishes a card from your hand to summon like a beast or something like that to an elf arrow, and then on your next turn you can get more value off the MO5. So it just gives you more card advantage, which is, as I've said many times, very important for a deck like this. So then we'll get into the side deck, and then I'll talk about some potential other engines that I tried. So we've got the 2 other Mutant Fusions, put these in going second. D-Fisher and Macrocosmos. This kind of does change how your deck works. I feel like whenever you're playing any Floodgate, it changes how you play your deck, even if the deck plays into it really well. Maybe not like full-on Degrees, right, with these cards, but the only thing it really changes is like it turns off the Sprite Elf combo and some other niche situations, but as I said, you want most of your things banished anyways, so it's really not that big of a deal. And so I might take out these Super Polys to play these instead, just because these are very powerful plays into the current meta. So definitely these would come in going first, especially if Super Poly is not useful in a matchup. We've got Skill Drain here. So as I've said before, like we've got massive bodies in the main deck. We've got fusion spells that summon from the graveyard. We've got lots of card advantage engines. And our cards, our Mutant cards, though the Skill Drain will negate their effects to add cards to our hand, which is unfortunate. They can tribute themselves and banish a card, and that effect will resolve, because the card leaves the field before the effect resolves in chain, and so Skill Drain would not negate it, which means we have, like, especially combined with the Mutant Cry shuffling back the level 8s once they've used their effects, which you can use their effects just by banishing them for cost, well then you will be able to continually bring out really strong, powerful monsters over and over again. So that's nice. Yeah, so Solemn Judgment here, because we've got, is this a control deck, a trap deck, so you want to stop, blowouts from, like, Lightning Storm or something like that. It's not the worst thing in the world, because you can always chain. Like, you don't lose all of your value like you would in some other decks. Like in the Labrynth deck, for example, like, those are meant to remove your monsters, and if you blow them out with Harvey's Featherstorm, they've got no removal and they've got no value, because they can't chain them, really, if you have no monsters on field. But this, like, you will be able to Mutant Expansion in response. You will be able to Mutant Cry in response. TCPO obviously not, Imperm obviously not, but yes, so Solemn Judgment is just very important. Harvey's Feather Duster, and then I had 1 Pancratops and then 3 Evenly Mashes back as like counter back row removal against other control decks, but I just took those out so I could remember to talk about these things here. So that's my more recommended side. I think definitely like these cards here on the side, and then you could probably just do whatever with the rest of the spots. So then these are the little engines, sub-engines I tested. I think there's maybe an idea for Eldritch Mutants, just because they're both really powerful control decks. And then like Eldritch can send the expansions on field, or TCBOs on field. But also you could just consider playing one just regular Eldritch, just to be able to use it as a removal spell, and then also get rid of your TCBOs when it's inconvenient. I don't know about that though, but then traditionally Mutants, like during 2020, during the pandemic, Mutant was like a roguish deck before Mutant played with the Invoked engine, and I think it's okay. some of the replays I have, which I don't know if I'm actually going to be using those in this video, but they do use this, and it is definitely useful, but you kind of, like, it still feels like in the deck, the mutant part of the engine is doing most of the work, and it's like, I would prefer to play more cards that get me to the mutant engine, or more just powerful staple cards, rather than like a really bad normal summon, because like Alistair, unless you draw E-Tele or the Mutant Evolution Lab, like, this is competing for your normal summon with your regular mutants, and very often the engine you get from the Mutant Cry, if you successfully set it up, is more powerful than just like one negate, because it's like an infinite engine, right? And so I just didn't love this, but I think it's worth trying, and maybe I will in the future. I tried Branded. The only reason I didn't do Branded, and the other reason is that with the Alistair engine, you can play the Sprite Elf package, but you can't play the Dimension Shifter, because Dimension Shifter just completely destroys the Invoked engine. Like, you just can't do anything with it at all. And so, yeah, you can't main deck it at least. You could maybe play it side and then just side the Invoked out when you're siding in the D-Shifters, but I don't know. The Branded Fusion, you can play the D-Shifter engine, but you can't play the Sprite Elf package, and if you D-Shifter your own cards, it's kind of awkward. But there might be legs to this. I just feel like the Branded Fusion just got Ash, and it kind of added like an unnecessary like weakness and very obvious choke point to the deck. But there's definitely maybe some legs here. Maybe if you wanted to make it more significantly branded than I did, I kind of just did like the standard, you know, 2 like Albaz and 3 Branded Fusions, and then a light target. I think I used Eldritch as the light target. But in any case, the final one I tried was Stripe for Patchwork, just because this is a fusion archetype. I figured that, you know, we got a lot of bodies on field that are just left over because they've used those effects, and then the card advantage could be good. We could use like Fright for Patchwork, we could use Guardian Chimera, and it was okay. But I feel like the games I lost were the games where I opened like a chain, you know, and the chain's not doing anything, because there's not really any in-archetype generic fusion like there would be in something like Shaddoll Fusion. Because in Shaddolls, you can use Shaddoll Fusion or El Shaddoll to start the Fright for Patchwork engine, because you can use that chain as a material to summon like a window or something, because the materials are relatively generic, whereas the mutants are not generic at all. They're only mutant monsters, and so I don't really think this package is worth using. So yeah, and then as I mentioned before, I think Dogmatica might be an option to explore, but I just didn't look into it. Maybe you should. So yeah, so that's it. Very long-winded explanation of this archetype. Hopefully it was very thorough, because I'm sure many of you haven't seen this before. And so I will now go to some replays where I demonstrate how this deck is meant to be played. Okay, in an effort to keep this a little easier to edit, and I think a little shorter for you guys, because I don't think you super love the long videos, though you know, I like doing them, and it's kind of just my style. I kind of talk a lot, and I have a lot to say about these archetypes. I think I'll just show you two replays. So this is the first one. This is versus Labrynth, which is kind of interesting because it shows how this control deck works against other control decks. This is a very short one. They ended up scooping, but it was kind of obvious what was going to happen, and you'll see why. So they go first. I D-Shifter them. It's very unfortunate that most control decks cannot play under D-Shifter, so they have to chain their Chandragolier to be able to use it at all, because these cards have to go to the graveyard. Most of their cards have to go to the graveyard, in fact. And because they do play out of the graveyard a lot with their Labrynth monsters, this is going to be really painful for them. And so D-Shifter is a valuable tool for this deck. I know it may seem sacky, but also other decks have a lot more. You know, they got a lot of sacky things too. So this is a valuable tool. Always use it. Always. So they set the Welcome Labrynth, which summons the big Labrynth monster. They set the field spell, and then they set one other card here, which ends up being Torrential, I think. I draw for turn, and I draw the Spell Trap Mutant, which is good. I mean, drawing this one is kind of bad. You don't really want to draw it. You want to have 2 in deck just so you can use it, but you don't really want to draw it because you want to add it off of the MO5. Though it's not terrible. It's not terrible to have in hand. And so the E-Tele here, as we drew the SD46, is obviously going to be for the MO5. MO5, I add just another SD46 just for follow-up. That E-Tele gets banished, and then this is the setup for the Sprite combo, but unfortunately, we're under D-Shifter, so the Sprite combo would not work at all, the Sprite Elf combo. And so here, I activate the Mutant effect to banish Evolution Lab, which will, of course, summon Mutant Mist, which is the one that lets you draw if your opponent activates a trap card. Draw 2 cards, in fact, which is crazy. So I'm trying to sniff out the back row, because obviously I know this one is Welcome Labrynth, which I don't really care that much about, because if this card right here is not super live, or if I can force them to activate it before they can use Welcome Labrynth, well then it doesn't matter at all, because this card is going to just summon the big Labrynth monster, and the big Labrynth monster it has trigger effects that trigger when you when a card leaves the field, or when a trap is activated. So I'm trying to force this out, and so I figure this is going to get activated. I at least want to get like some value out of it. So I get the Mist. I normal the ST. This is a weird place to activate this. I feel like I would wait until after whatever the next thing is, because I don't know. They definitely don't know the archetypes. So they don't know that there's really no way for me to negate this or find a way to negate this. So I just chain the draw. I banish the Mist, or no, I banish the ST46 from hand because I'm not going to need it. I'm not going to get another normal summon this turn, right? And then they chain the Labrynth so that the Labrynth will hit the field, and then this card will resolve. Oh no, they actually, yeah, they're going into Ariana. They do Ariana because I think this is going to end my turn, and they want to have another Labrynth card to be able to stop. Also, if I can then remove the big Labrynth monster, which I think is actually going to get summoned. Oh, they must have it in hand, because I think they summon it off of this. But if they do that, then I'm going to be able to banish it if it leaves the field this turn, right? So yeah, so I banish the Mist for cost. Draw 2. A Lich. Really bad draw on this time, and this is actually why I took this out of the deck profiles, because it doesn't work with Dimension Shifter. They lose their thing. I don't remember what they set. Maybe they just summoned it. No, yeah, because it didn't get a chance to activate, because it would have been destroyed in chain. So I guess that just activating the Welcome Labyrinth lets them destroy a card on the field, except I don't have any cards. They activate the Chandragolier. I don't want the Chandragolier to set a Labyrinth Spell Trap from my deck, from their deck, because I was trying to go for the grind game, obviously. I didn't really have any engine in hand after this. So, and this is, I mean, look, you can see this is like Chain Link, yeah, this is Chain Link 4 here, so, like, this is pretty complicated. Banish the Chandragolier. They summon, oh, the Lovely Labyrinth is in hand, that's why. And then Miss is the final chain to activate, and this is add back one of the monsters, which is another nice thing. It'll add back the ST46 for next turn. Now I can use Mutant Fusion to banish the ST46, and then another beast from deck, which will summon a beast. Oh no, it summons an Ultimus, yeah. So that went a little fast, unfortunately. So I summon the Ultimus using the Mutant Fusion, because I can banish from hand my ST46 and then my Mutant Beast. If we had one in the graveyard, I could have banished from the graveyard, which would have been a nice utility there. So it's just two different attributes to summon the Ultimus. The Ultimus pops the Labyrinth, and at this point, they have no cards. They're going to top deck a trap. They have no way to activate their engine unless they specifically draw a Welcome Labyrinth. The Dimension Shifter just really plays havoc here, and then I'm going to lock them under TCBO, so they're going to get one thing. And the next turn, I can just remove whatever they have using There Can Be Only One, bring back the There Can Be Only One, swing for a lot of damage. And then if they ever remove the Synthesis by Destruction, which is how most of their effects are, I mean, they've got TCBO, but I mean, Ice Dragon's Prison, but obviously they can't use Ice Dragon Prison, and I have nothing of Psychic in the graveyard. So this is probably going to get removed by Destruction, like Archfiend Glitch, or something like that. I guess they could use Calm Pulse, but in any case, they're top decking against a deck that has their engine already running. I understood why they scoop. It would have been more interesting if they hadn't scooped, but this is just a good example of, like, Dimension Shifter plays really well with this engine to such a degree that you can just plow through, like, an entire established control deck engine. So yeah, so that's this game, relatively short, but now I'll go to probably a more interesting game. Okay, so this duel is against Tearalament, which is interesting because my local meta includes quite a few Tearalament players. There's also a lot of Sprite, but quite a few Tearalament players, and Tearalament players who have played fusion decks like Invoked or Despia for a really long time, so they're very comfortable with fusions. And so I was actually really concerned about that matchup, so let's see how this one plays out. So this hand, just to start out with, Prosperity, obviously always good, Ash, always good, not super great against Tearalament unless they're kind of bricked. You can also just save it for like the meta noise, but I think I use it early here just because I don't want to even let them get to the trap. Two of these is good for grind, but not really good for explosive, and I think I'm going second, which is unfortunate. This would be good going first. And then ST46, which is just going to search one of these two, so I kind of would have preferred this as an MO5, I think, but let's get into it. So the instant fusion for the Kit Kalos. Kit Kalos is going to get the Ash for me every time. This is always my Ash target, I think, if I don't know anything else about their hand, just because, like, I don't want them searching another tier, I don't want them searching another, like, a meta noise if they already have another tier. This is just always the Ash for me here. So then that forces them to use their dangers. They Mothman, Jackalope, bring out Nessie, which is just great. Reinforcement for Rhinoheart, then everything they could ever want, right? And they don't even hit the, they don't hit the Mothman. Rhinoheart with sending a Merrily to shuffle back. They go into a Garura here. Yeah, both Aquas. They go into a Garura to link into a Curious. It's so crazy that Garura, like, Garura was the perfect type to be able to make Curious in this deck. It's like they knew this deck was coming or something. Curious here to draw cards, send the Fairy Tale Snow, which which is, I think, a very good play here, especially if you get stopped in the trap, just because the Fairy Tale Snow plays havoc with so many decks. I mean, including Scareclaw, the deck we last talked about, right? You book the normal summon, you win, and so I think this is a very, very strong play if you don't know. Like, I think this was game 1 of a best of 3. They had no idea what I was playing, so this is definitely a strong play here. Mill the next 3. I mean, that's right, like the Galaxy Cyclone, the Rhino Heart, that's such a good no there. Unfortunately, I think they don't have any tier cards in hand. It's the reason that this doesn't do anything. Or they don't have any, yeah, they don't have any Tearalament cards in hand. So they send if they have Foolish Burial, almost as good. They Halfness here for Kaleido Heart, shuffling back the tier Rhino Heart and Grave. They can go to Topologic Bomber Dragon using these 2, and then that sets them up to be able to destroy my monsters on their turn using Snow. So not only do they have a Snow book if they want it, but they also have a complete wipe of the field, which is really one-sided because Kaleido Heart wants to be sent to the graveyard because it lets them trigger a lot of things. So, in any case, how do I play into this? Well, I draw the E-Tailer for turn, which is quite possibly the best draw that I could have drawn here. The only better draw could have been a Super Polar to be able to Super Polar these 2. That's the only better draw into a Dragon's Tepelia, in case you're wondering. But E-Tailer is really good here because now I can force this out without having to use my normal summon, which is exactly what I want because this is not once per turn. So I need to get rid of this without using my normal summon or else I just lose, especially because it's just going to be popping my resources every single turn. So there's MO5, of course. MO5 adding Mutant. This card's so good for this exact situation, right? Then they Gizmek to trigger their Topologic Bomber Dragon, which I did not expect at all. I thought they were going to try and trigger it with their Snow. Nope. Trigger it. They trigger it with their Gizmek. So then they Topologic Bomber Dragon, popping this card and their Kaleido Heart, which was a good play because I think that they realized that Mutant requires a Mutant card, and so they want to clear this. Unfortunately, I mean, I have another one, right? Like, I still have my normal summon, but they can Winda here. They finally mill the Shaddoll. It's amazing that they didn't banish it, right? But they did. So luckily, Mutant Fusion, as I said, outs Winda very easily. But here we have a unique opportunity to out Winda way better than the way I was describing earlier, which is attacking over it with the Mutant Synthesis. We can trigger our opponent's Bomber Dragon. Because if you notice, Winda is indestructible by card effects, but only your opponent's card effects. And that's why, like, for example, Torrential is sometimes played in Shaddoll Trap, but not always, because you can destroy your own Floodgate, right? And so I'm going to use their not once per turn Topologic Bomber Dragon to destroy their own monster. So the way I'm going to do that is by activating Mutant here to summon itself to this zone. Because I have really, I mean, obviously I would prefer if my ST46 stuck around, but this is a better use of it. Bomber Dragon trigger destroys their Winda. Since they've already used Kaleido Heart, it can't trigger again. So now all they've got is the Bomber Dragon, and then since they've already used Gizmek's effect, it's just Snow. And I can see their hand, I can see their field. All they've got is Bomber Dragon, Snow. So obviously, as soon as I put something on field, they're going to Bomber Dragon. They're going to Snow to trigger the Bomber Dragon. But because this is an ignition effect, this works exactly how I want it to, right? I'm going to Mutant Fusion because my opponent has activated quite a few effects on my turn. And then they chain Snow. Not sure why. I guess the reason they chain Snow here, and this, obviously in the replay, it looks like they decided right away, but this actually did take them quite a bit, so I think they were deliberating about how this chain works. They want to pop it right away on summon, so I don't have a chance to activate any effects. I don't think they know what I'm going to into here off the Mutant Fusion, which is to my advantage. So this is going to help me get some of these out of graveyard that are stuck here, and it's going to help me clear the board. And so they're going to trigger their Bomber Dragon. I do MO5 because that's the one I want to add back if my thing gets popped, and then my Arsenal from deck to summon Synthesis to my opponent's arrows once again, which triggers Bomber Dragon, which is I think, yeah, it's a mandatory trigger, so it goes on the stack, or it goes on the chain first, and then my effect does to pop it, and then my opponent's effect, because these are both, so this is mandatory, and these are both optional. So my mandatory go on first, I don't have any, their mandatory goes on first. Then my optional, then their optional. So if they want to activate Snow, if they don't want to, fine, whatever. But if they want to, they have to do it after my activation, which then allows me as Chainlink 4 to activate the effect of Synthesis once again to make it unaffected by monster effects total, which thus clears my opponent's field with Topologic Bomber Dragon killing the Snow, and then my Synthesis effect killing the Bomber Dragon. and now they have no cards in field, only with a snow as a possible disruption. So they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cards exactly. So they can stop me from doing damage this turn, but then they banish literally every single card in their graveyard, and Tearalament does not top deck well. So they do special summon it again, and they book it, which I think is an example of my opponent not really knowing what mutant card does, and this is the advantage you'll have from playing a rogue deck, right, at all times. They don't realize, I guess, that it makes it unaffected for the rest of the turn. They try to snow it again. But even if they hadn't, they just try to, like, I mean, they had nothing in grave. They had the Gizmek for next turn, maybe. But I could also get my engine going. I can then do another fuse into another mutant on their turn. Using the prosperity, potentially I could have gotten something greater to be able to keep doing more combos, to be able to set up even like an Omni Negate. And again, they're just top decking, maybe going into like a Link 2 with a Sprite or with a Snow and a Gizmek Orochi. So this was a great example of what mutants can do. A very explosive game. Both games actually very explosive. Not great demonstrations of the grind game, but you can see where the grind game comes from. So I'll throw you back to the deck profile, I guess, screen, so that I can give you my final thoughts on the deck and what I hope the deck, what I think the deck needs in the future. Okay, so we're here with the deck profile that I settled on, the one I'm going to be playing at locals this week and next, I don't know. I really like this deck's axis of gameplay. The like sort of quick effect Thunder Dragon Fusion pop reminds me of like Starry Nights, which is not exactly a positive comparison, but the way their interruption is really cool, like bouncing the Starry Night, Starry Dragon back to hand and then special summoning it to pop monsters continually. That's kind of what Synthesis does, except it's kind of stickier. It works a lot better with a lot more floodgates. Well, TCBO specifically, which is a really powerful floodgate in this current format. Though some decks can play it, I don't know. The Mutant expansion and then the level 8 monsters are a very interesting gimmick, I guess. They allow you to play under Scythe. They mean that you can play in a lot more simplified game states a lot better than a lot of other decks can. And I think also the variance of interactions this deck can put up, like you can put up like a floodgate, you can put up a spell trap, a spell negate, you can put up a banish, you can put up a, a quick effect pop, you've got super poly, you've got a lot of different things, and I think that's kind of something that most decks don't offer, because like Scareclaw, it's got the one Omni Negate, but otherwise it's just like, OTK, which I really like, obviously. Like, I really like the Scareclaw deck. Drytron, they just kind of floodgate you. A lot of other decks play like one or two things, but this deck, through its variety of extra deck tools and its own engine being quite varied, does quite a bit. And while it isn't always super successful, it's always really fun and really flavorful to play with. So I really like it. Hope you give it a chance. But as far as what this deck needs or the weaknesses, and if you guys can find any like techs or sub-engines that help to shore up these specific weaknesses, I'd be super glad to hear it in the comments below, or any other way you want to message me, such as like Twitter, just at Morphing Jars on Twitter also. I think the deck could really benefit from, like I said, another virus that's a different, like maybe an Earth or a Dark type. A Dark type would be really good, actually. Like a dark little virus, like Mutant. I don't know, like another one of these little mutants that does something else. Like maybe it could be maybe like when it's summoned, maybe it can special summon itself like mutant, and instead of like doing this effect to be able to summon one, it just banishes from deck. And though that might be quite powerful to have like two extenders like that, but then at least the card will see some play, right? Just to have another mutant of a different attribute to be able to make summoning Synthesis easier, that would be really nice. And then on top of that, I mean, of course, like more of these would be interesting. More of these little brick beasts, like playing another, like a fourth one of these that wasn't beast. That'd be cool. And then I think there isn't really any way, like so funnily enough, this deck literally does have an E-Tally, which is a problem that I had with Scareclaw. There's no really good extender that doesn't use like your normal summon or rely on other setup. This deck does have that, but it's just that the payoffs are like relatively lackluster, right? Like Synthesis is not amazing, even though we have a super powerful Mutant Cry, we have Synthesis, which is not great. And that's probably how this card, like how Mutant Cry is balanced, right? Is that Synthesis, for one, it requires like a huge investment into the mutant archetype. Pretty much can only play it in pure mutants. And so, but then in addition to that, they also limited Synthesis and Ultimus to not be great cards. Ultimus is cool, but has a ridiculous summoning condition. So maybe like a hybrid between these, like a card that was a fusion monster, but did not, like maybe it was a little more stringent requirements than Synthesis, or about as stringent as Synthesis, but was a little more powerful. Like it was a monster negate, or a spell trap, like just a pure spell trap negate, or something, I don't know. Maybe like something more like Guardian Chimera, where it does like a souped up version of Synthesis, where it's just like more proactive, where it like pops cards, like a bunch of cards, and it's really hard to remove, but it doesn't actually do an active negate, and that would turn Cry into something that you really want to be doing on your turn, or that would give Mutant Fusion a lot more teeth, right? Because right now Mutant Fusion only can really summon Mutant Synthesis, and even then, Mutant Synthesis is not that scary of a thing. I mean, it's not even as scary as Construct, right? And Construct is from 2014. So I think maybe another potentially summonable mutant payoff would be very good. Yeah. So really doesn't need that much more. I think probably even one piece of support. I mean, even just the different attributed little mutant would be enough. But I would like to see those two things. But yeah, so that's what I think this deck needs. If you have any ideas for ways to fix that, those are kind of specific, so I don't know how you would fix it. But I hope you guys enjoyed this profile. I hope you'll give mutants a chance. They're relatively cheap, as I really like showing off these cheap decks. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any comments or criticisms, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And if you guys are interested in dueling with me, doing testing, or just doing some like just messing around discussion, I'm interested in maybe making a Discord, or just like a place for us to be able to do that sort of thing. If you guys are interested, let me know below. See you guys. Have a nice day.